My name is Naomi Hart, and I was born and raised in America. For years, I believed my place in the world was tied to my father's company, Hart North Technologies. I gave everything I had to that job. Late nights, endless travel, contracts signed under pressure, presentations rehearsed until my voice went hoarse. I thought I was proving myself, proving to my father that I could carry his legacy forward. But the night of my promotion party changed everything. It was the night I learned exactly how small he saw me. The ballroom at the Harborview Hotel in Boston glittered like a stage set for a play. A chandelier above my head spilled light across the marble floor, and the air smelled faintly of champagne mixed with lemon polish. A live jazz band played soft notes, while servers in black uniforms circled the room with trays of oysters and sparkling wine. I wore a navy dress that brushed against my knees, chosen because my best friend Grace said it made me look like I commanded the room. I wanted that to be true. I wanted this night to be the start of something bigger. Instead, it became the end. My father, Richard Hart, stood at the front of the room with his easy smile. Everyone knew that smile, employees, investors, even the waiters moving between tables. He could light up a room with it, and that night, he used it to call up Evan Blake, my coworker. Evan stepped forward, feigning surprise. My stomach dropped before I even understood what was happening. My father handed him a plaque with bold letters, Vice President of Strategy. My title, my work, my fingerprints. The applause that followed sounded like a wave crashing over me. It stung against my skin, not because of Evan, but because of what my father had just declared to the world. I was not worthy. Then my father turned to me. He slipped something into my hand, 3 crisp $20 bills. $60 in total. He smiled, as if he had done something generous, and said, "These dollars are for you. You worked hard." His tone carried the softness of a joke, but it cut sharper than any insult could have. Evan laughed behind him, not even trying to hide it. And then my father moved on, leaving me standing there, humiliated in front of the very people I had led and trained. I couldn't breathe in that room anymore. I walked out onto the terrace, the cold night air rushing against my cheeks. Boston stretched below me, glowing with city lights and the sound of traffic on Starro Drive. For a moment, the city felt both far away and too close. My mind went quiet, stripped of excuses. I thought about my brownstone on Pinckney Street in Beacon Hill, the crooked stair I had been meaning to repair, the mortgage I had worked so hard to pay down. I thought about the little postcard of the White Cliffs in England, bought years ago on a cheap student trip, with the words "Keep Going" written across the front. That night, those words finally found their meaning. I went back inside only long enough to collect my coat. I didn't wait for dessert, didn't say goodbye to anyone, and didn't even try to confront my father. What was there left to say? I walked down Charles Street in heels that pinched harder with every step, my shoulders pulled tight against the wind. By the time I reached my house, I had already made my decision. The front door closed behind me, sealing out the noise of the city, and I stood in the silence of my kitchen. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and old books. I looked around at the walls that had held me through years of ambition and sacrifice, and I realized that this house, imperfect as it was, belonged entirely to me. My job did not. I pressed the $60 against the fridge with a magnet. The bills looked ridiculous there, like a child's drawing someone had displayed out of pity. Then I opened my laptop and typed my resignation. No hesitation. No second-guessing. I hit send, and for the first time in years, I felt light. At 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a message from Evan. No hard feelings, right? The arrogance dripped off the screen. I turned the phone face down and ignored it. I didn't need his false sympathy. The old radiator hissed in the corner, filling the silence with a steady rhythm. I brewed tea and watched the steam curl upward. As I sat at my kitchen table, the truth settled into me. I didn't belong to that company anymore. For the first time in a long while, I belonged only to myself. The first week after I walked away from Hart North felt like waking from a fever. My body finally rested, as though it had crossed some endless desert and collapsed at the edge of water. I slept until noon, then rose slowly, pacing my brownstone with the quiet steps of someone relearning how to live. Every morning I made lists. Small, ordinary lists at first: groceries, errands, repairs for the crooked stair on the landing. But then larger lists crept in, plans and possibilities, sketches of a future I had never been free enough to imagine. My house, with its worn banister and uneven kitchen tiles, became my command center. The walls seemed to whisper, "You are no longer tied to anyone else's expectations." It was in that haze of recovery that I called Grace Whitfield, my oldest friend and a sharp-minded attorney in Cambridge. Grace had a voice like polished steel, smooth but capable of cutting straight through fog. We sat at my kitchen table with mugs of coffee, the $60 still pinned to the fridge behind us like an unwanted reminder. She listened as I explained the promotion party, the humiliation, and the sudden hollow space that had opened inside me. Then I told her the part one had never shared with anyone. 2 years earlier, during one of my countless late nights buried in company data, I had built something entirely my own. I coded it at home on my personal server, careful never to mix it with company work. I called it HarborMind, a predictive model that could map customer behavior with uncanny precision. I had tested it against real client data, anonymized, of course, and its accuracy had stunned even me. When the board demanded a miracle, my father asked for my slides. I gave him charts and graphs drawn from HarborMind, but never once did I hand over the engine itself. The code lived only with me, protected by copyright filings stamped with my name and time-stamped emails that proved the model was mine alone. Grace flipped through the folders I had laid out, each document carefully labeled. She tapped her fingernail against the legal seal on the copyright form. "This is your key," she said firmly. "Protect what is yours. Then build what is next." Her certainty gave me courage. Within days, we filed the paperwork to form Harbor Ledger LLC. A new name, a clean slate. It felt strange, attaching my identity not to Heart North, not to my father, but to something entirely of my own creation. I leased a modest office near the public garden, a narrow space with tall windows and the faint smell of old books. The rent was not cheap, but I had $280,000 in savings and an open credit line. Enough to take the risk. Next, I reached out to people I trusted, rare in my world. Lena, a quiet but brilliant analyst from Providence, and Joel, a systems engineer from Philadelphia with steady hands and a quick wit. Both had worked under me before, and both knew the long hours and the relentless demands. When I told them what I was building, neither hesitated. They wanted in. Our first contract came from New York, a mid-sized retail firm looking for ways to predict customer churn. We priced it carefully at $95,000. When they signed, I felt something inside me click open, like discovering a hidden door in a house you already owned. A door I had walked past for years, blind to its existence, is now finally within reach. At night, when the office was quiet, I drove north to the farmhouse I had inherited from my grandmother Rose. She had grown up in Ohio but spent her last years in Maine, leaving behind a property with white clapboards, a stone wall, and black pines that lined the horizon like a watchful guard. I had bought the house from my cousins with her inheritance, just as she had urged me. Put your money into something that can hold you when you are tired. In those early weeks, that house held me. I stacked firewood, ran my hands across the rough beams, and let my breath steady. The farmhouse reminded me that I had roots deeper than any company could sever. By the third week, Grace arranged a video call with a London investment fund. The partner, Eleanor Quinn, joined with a calm voice that rolled across the Atlantic like steady rain on a roof. She said she had reviewed my deck, had studied the projections, and believed Harbor Ledger had potential. Then she made her offer. £1 million for a minority stake, with one condition: a seat on the advisory board. Control, she promised, would remain fully mine. Hearing that figure made me inhale slowly, as though my lungs needed extra space to hold it. It wasn't just money. It was validation from someone outside my father's shadow, someone who looked at me and saw not a child to be handed $60, but a leader worthy of investment. I walked to the Charles River that evening, the sky deep blue, the water moving like a dark ribbon through the city. I leaned on the railing, my breath visible in the cold, and whispered the word that had been waiting on my tongue. Yes. On paper, Harbor Ledger was just a fledgling firm with a single contract. But in reality, I now held a key no one else could see. If Heart North tried to use HarborMind without my permission, Grace was ready to strike with legal force. If they wanted to license it, they would pay in dollars or in pounds. I was no longer bound by my father's approval, and I did not crave revenge. What I wanted were boundaries, lines they could not cross without consequence. Every morning when I brewed coffee, my eyes fell on the $60 on the fridge. The bills no longer burned with humiliation. They made me smile, though not with joy. They were a reminder of the rule I now lived by. If someone tells you what you are worth, don't argue. Walk away. Build something that makes their number look foolish. My brownstone, with its cracked tiles and crooked stairs, had become more than a house. It was a fortress, a sanctuary, and a headquarters for my new life. The old farmhouse in Maine waited when I needed quiet. The office near the public garden buzzed with fresh energy as Lena and Joel sketched plans on the whiteboard. And across the ocean, Eleanor's faith gave me wings I hadn't known I was missing. I was no longer the daughter standing forgotten at a party. I was Naomi Hart, founder of Harbor Ledger, holding a key that the world hadn't yet realized I owned. And I knew the day would come when that key would unlock more than just my future. It would force everyone, including my father, to reckon with the truth of who I really was. A month later, Boston was thawing into early spring. The air was still sharp, but light lingered longer in the sky, stretching over the Charles River and washing the city in pale gold. I sat in my small office above the swan boats, sipping lukewarm coffee while Lena sketched graphs on the whiteboard. Joel burst in, his laptop clutched like a life raft. His face was pale, eyes wide. "You need to see this," he said. I swiveled my chair, and he spun the screen toward me. There it was, stark and undeniable. Heart North's stock chart had plummeted in a single day, down 90%, a vertical drop that looked like a ski slope carved into the market. The headlines scrolled across the news feed: delayed earnings call, client churn, catastrophic underperformance of their flagship product. My stomach twisted because I knew exactly which product they meant. I knew which slides had sold it to investors. And I knew what lay behind those slides, hidden like a locked door with no handle. HarborMind. HarborMind did not live at Heart North. It had never belonged to them. It lived with me, on my secured server, behind passwords only I knew. The code was mine. The future they had promised shareholders was never theirs to claim. Before I could even process the rush of emotions, anger, vindication, sorrow for the employees caught in the fallout, my phone buzzed on the desk. My father's name glowed on the screen. I stared at it the way one watches a storm move across a radar map, knowing it will hit but unable to stop it. After a long pause, I answered. "Naomi," he said, his voice tight and smaller than I had ever heard it. "I need you in New York. Today. This is a misunderstanding. We can fix it." I turned in my chair to face the postcard of the white cliffs pinned above my desk. The words "keep going" seemed to glow in the fading light. I spoke carefully. "What do you need from me?" "A meeting with the board," he said quickly. "We have interested buyers from Europe. They want to see the model you built. The one we presented. We have to show them the capacity. If we land these contracts, we can stabilize the stock price and raise bridge funding. I'll make this right for you. I promise." Boston's skyline shimmered outside the window, clean and bright, untangled from the shadows of my past. I let the silence stretch before I answered. "Dad, you do not own HarborMind. You never did." The line went quiet. I could almost hear him gripping the phone, searching for words. Finally, his voice came, softer, almost pleading. "Can we license it? Name the number." Just then, my other phone buzzed with a message from Grace. She was always one step ahead. She and Eleanor were already in our group thread. Eleanor had typed, "If they ask for a license, you set the terms. Also consider the acquisition of assets. We can support up to $25 million if control remains with you." Reading those words steadied me. My hands, which had been trembling slightly, grew calm. I lifted the phone back to my ear. "I'll come to New York," I said. "We'll talk." When the call ended, I sat very still, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside and the scratch of Lena's marker against the whiteboard. I didn't want revenge. That was too small, too bitter. What I wanted was my own life, unshackled and wholly mine. People often confuse justice with vengeance, but they are not the same. The next morning, I boarded the train south. The carriage was half full, the air heavy with the smell of coffee and newspapers. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window and watched New England blur past, bare trees, old stone walls, small towns waking into spring. My reflection stared back at me, the same eyes, the same determined mouth, but no longer the same woman who once stood humiliated at a party with $60 in her hand. I thought about that night, about the sound of Evan's laughter, and the way my father had moved past me like I was nothing. The anger still flickered, but it no longer burned me. It passed through me like weather, here for a moment, and then gone. By the time the train slid into Penn Station, I wasn't angry. I was something else entirely. Prepared. Prepared to face my father not as his daughter seeking approval, but as a leader holding power he desperately needed. Prepared to look his board in the eye and remind them of the truth. I was not theirs to control, and neither was Harbor Mind. Prepared to decide, on my terms, whether Heart North would rise from its ashes or collapse entirely. The city roared around me as I stepped onto the platform. New York smelled like ambition and asphalt, loud and unrelenting. I pulled my coat tighter, adjusted the strap of my bag, and walked toward the waiting car Grace had arranged. My heart was steady, my mind clear. The game had shifted. For the first time, the board, the investors, and even my father would have to meet me where I stood. And I was ready. The boardroom at Heart North towered above Midtown Manhattan, its glass walls turning the city into a miniature model below. Yellow taxis moved like toy cars, and the Hudson glimmered faintly in the distance. I had walked into many boardrooms before, but never like this, never carrying leverage that could tilt the room in my favor. Evan sat near the far end of the polished oak table, his usual confidence drained into a pale silence. My father stood at the head of the table, a bottle of water in front of him that he hadn't touched. His shoulders sagged under the weight of failure, but his eyes still searched for a lifeline. Around us, directors shifted uncomfortably, their gazes sharp with the fear of men and women who had seen fortunes vanish in a single quarter. I set a folder on the table, its edges perfectly aligned. Grace sat to my left, her presence as steady as a wall of stone. On the large screen at the far end of the room, Eleanor's face appeared from London. Her voice, calm and precise, carried across the room like a measured bell. The chair of the board cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, Miss Hart. We respect your authorship. We would like to propose a license for your model so we can deliver on contracts already in progress." I opened my folder, my hand steady. "You may license Harbor Mind for 2 years," I said, my voice even. "The base fee will be $12 million, plus an 8% revenue share. You will credit Harbor Ledger in every filing. And under no circumstances will you claim the model as Heart North intellectual property. Finally, Mr. Blake will be removed from any role tied to product strategy. He presented work that was not his and that has legal risk." Evan flinched, his chair scraping against the floor as he shifted. My father's mouth twitched, but he stayed silent. The chair looked down the table, his lips pursed. "Those terms are strong." I nodded. "There is a second option. Eleanor, please explain." On the screen, Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her English cadence crisp. "Our fund will join Harbor Ledger to acquire select assets from Heart North for $25 million. These assets include your customer service platform, your Mid-Atlantic contracts, and your Boston office lease. The proceeds will reduce your debt load and allow restructuring. Ms. Hart will establish a new division called North Harbor, headquartered in America. Staff who wish to move will have that choice. Under her leadership, we expect profitability within 1 year." The room went silent. I could feel the weight of their thoughts pressing against the glass walls. My father looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't glimpsed in years: pride, tempered by exhaustion. He looked like a man remembering the daughter who once ran through their garden with perfect report cards clutched in her hands. Finally, he turned to the chair. His voice was quiet, but resolute. "I recommend option 2. Gasps rippled faintly across the table. Evan's face drained of what little color remained. He turned to me, desperation flickering across his features. "Naomi, come on. We're a team." The word struck me like the echo of that night on the terrace in Boston, when his laughter had sliced into me like a thin knife. I met his gaze evenly. "I don't hate you, Evan. But I don't owe you anything. I'm building something honest. If you want to be part of it, you can apply like everyone else." His jaw worked soundlessly, but he said nothing more. The negotiations stretched through the afternoon. We signed document after document, the weight of each signature settling into my chest like stones building a foundation. When the last paper slid across the table, I closed my pen and exhaled. The deal was done. I reached into my purse and pulled out the $60. The bills were folded, their edges worn from weeks pinned to my fridge. I walked to my father and pressed them into his palm. "These dollars are for you," I said, not with anger, but with a calm so deep it felt like still water. "You worked hard." For a moment, his face cracked. He gave a small, broken laugh that trembled in the air. Then he pulled me into a hug, hesitant at first, then fierce. It felt like stepping into a house with its door finally open. That evening, I boarded the train back to Boston. The city's lights faded behind me as the dark fields of Connecticut rolled past. I leaned against the window, tired but steady, and let the rhythm of the rails carry me home. When I unlocked my brownstone, the familiar creak of the door welcomed me. I switched on the kitchen light, and the room glowed with warmth. I removed the empty magnet from the fridge and replaced it with a new frame, this time holding a note I had written earlier that morning. It read, "Pay yourself first." I brewed tea and sat at the table, my hands wrapped around the warm mug. I called Grace to thank her, then Eleanor to discuss the first hires for North Harbor. Each conversation felt like a step into a future I had built for myself, brick by brick, choice by choice. America is wide, I thought, as I gazed out the window at the quiet street. It holds cities that shine and farms that rest in silence. And now I hold both in my life. The farmhouse in Maine with its stone wall and black pines, where I could breathe deeply. The brownstone in Boston with its crooked stairs and glowing kitchen, where I could plot new beginnings. The office above the swan boats, alive with the scratch of markers and the hum of ambition. When I wake each morning, I choose which door to open. And no matter which I choose, I walk into rooms that belong entirely to me. I am Naomi Hart. I built this life with my work, my will, and my refusal to let anyone else decide my worth. Every space I own, every room, every house, every division, carries my name not because it was given to me, but because I claimed it. And that truth, more than any title or paycheck, is my inheritance.